Hello, my name is Joanne Robinson, and one of my roles is the CEO of International School Leadership, ISL, a subsidiary of the Ontario Principals Council. We're devoted to providing powerful professional learning for teachers, principals, school heads, and system leaders around the world. All of our programs are grounded in current research from across the globe, from the Ontario experience in striving for excellence, and from the Ontario Principals Council history of delivering exemplary professional development. So on behalf of the ISL, I would like to welcome you to this web-based interview with Michael Fullan. It is the first in a series of free online presentations that are being offered by International School Leadership over the next year. The series will feature each of the members of our ISL Program Advisory Committee, including Andy Hargraves next on November 18, Ken Leithwood in December, Lynn Sherrod, Avis Glaze, and Karen Edge in the new year. And so the dates will be posted on our website, internationalschoolleadership.com, as they become available and distributed to all of those who've registered. But today we are lucky to have with us here Michael Fullan. So Michael, as a key member of our advisory panel and internationally recognized speaker, author of all those resources that we love to read, what would you say to our audience members who are based literally across the globe in terms of lessons learned from Ontario, the lessons that are universal for educational improvement? And just so you know, we've got audience members there from across Canada, Russia, China, New Zealand, Australia, Ireland, England, Mexico, and all sorts of other countries, Peru, Denmark, and the U.S. So what would you say are the universal lessons for sustaining educational improvement?
Well, first I would say that it's great to be part of OPC, the homegrown part, which we've been doing for 15 or more years. So developed a lot of leadership capacity within the province, drawing on ideas around the world, but playing them out here. And then to be part of ISL, all the better, because now we're seeing such interest for leadership. So we'll talk about more specific things as we go, but I think the first lesson, and we have it embedded in our work, is that developing leadership at all levels that's focused on the student achievement agenda is the kind of center of gravity of all of this work. Mm-hmm. And so developing that leadership means that the principal, historically, who really has been, I'll say historically, more of a manager, certainly hasn't really zeroed in on how do we develop and implement change in a powerful way within the school and within the district or whatever your arrangements are. So the new role is leading change and developing your capacity to do that and making sure it's centered on the student achievement agenda.
Thank you. Speaking from a global perspective now, what are the distinctions between an education system that is excellent, which is where Ontario's working to grow, versus one that is great? And of course, you know that I'm using the qualifiers that came out of the McKinsey report, but we've done a very interesting refocus here in Ontario. So what is it that we need to do to move from great to excellent, or what are the distinctions for other countries as they make that move?
I would say that, it's a bit of a distinction that's not sharp all the time. There's a difference between great and excellent, but the main point, I think, is two things. One is that the leadership at the school level, we just said that, really has to be intensely involved in developing the whole school, the culture of the school, and the linkage to whatever the arrangements are on this agenda to improve student learning through teacher development and collaborative development. So that is common. But the second thing is really the hard part, which is how do you get it to happen consistently in virtually 100% of the schools. Sure. So consistency, depth and consistency are the two things that are required for getting to excellence. You can have a lot of pockets of great stuff or excellent stuff, but if it's not consistent, it's not widespread, it's not developing together, it won't make for an excellent system.
Right. And I like that word together because it does express the alignment that we're proud of here in Ontario. So, Most of our audience today, though, Michael, is made up of school leaders, principals, head teachers, vice principals or deputies, supervisors, system leaders, some universities, aspiring school leaders, and government representatives, the whole gamut here, wanting to support both aspiring and experienced leaders and leadership development. They're keen to hear from you, your perspective on the key role that they can play in moving a system forward.
I would express it in two ways. The first way maybe is not as important as the second, but it's essential nonetheless, and that is to start defining the role more carefully. Let's call it the job description, to say it quickly, the criteria for promotion into it, and that, in other words, you start to get clearer and clearer about the nature of the role and the procedures that people would follow to gravitate towards that role, whether it's in a pre-development or actually on the job. So that's usually what we would call the human capital dimension, and it's essential to have that. The problem is a lot of systems stop at that. They say, okay, now we've got a framework, here it is, and people go through the pipeline, etc. And that won't carry it, it won't cut it, because you need to have it changing in the day-to-day culture of schools. So the second part, and this is the advice to all the people that you just described, is to start to create cultures where this is being implemented. Schools, multiple schools, districts, if that happens to be your framework, or regionally. And the thing about creating those cultures, one is that that's where the day-to-day learning is, because it's a culture of learning. You learn how to do it purposefully on the job. It's not just pre-development or a workshop. It's actually immersed in the culture. But the hidden part here that I want to be explicit about is when you develop a collaborative culture, leaders with leaders, the main job of the principal is also to develop the leadership of others on their team. And you can think of it this way: the junior members, the young members of the team, the collaborative team, are the future principals. That's where the pool comes from, ideally. And so that's what has to happen at the school level, leaders developing other leaders. And then the system, or if you're a supervisor or coordinator, you have to have that as your goal. How do I develop these leaders? How do I develop them in a way where they learn from each other? And then the last thing, which is more recent in the last 3 years, we have been figuring out with great power how leaders can learn from each other across schools, whether it's networks or whatever version that is. We call it, generally, if you want to change the group, use the group to change the group. So the principal, use teachers as a group to change teachers as a group by collaboration and focus. If you're working with principals, use other principals in that interaction so that people can learn from each other. It's on purpose, it's facilitated, it's enabled, it's specific, and it's powerful because the group covers a lot of people. Where if you do it hierarchically, you can only do this many. There's enough peers to go around, is the way to say it.
And I like that because it really does speak to the synergy of people working together and peers building on the work of peers, and it is much more powerful than the hierarchical model. Totally agree with you. In Ontario and throughout the world, there have been lots of changes in school leadership role, and I think our audience today would like to have your advice on where best to focus their energies, especially when it comes to moving a whole system forward. What should their priorities be? What should their practices, or what key practices should they incorporate and focus on?
There's the set of standards and practices that good places have developed that are based coming from the field, so to speak. And I just think of our Ontario Leadership Framework as one good example. And it's being created by the system, by peers and everybody in the system, but we as a system have developed it. In Australia, AITSL, which is the Australian Institute for Standards in both teaching and leaders, is another great version. So if you get the standards and the practices and the criteria of what that would look like pretty clear, that's one part of the solution. And the other part is, of course, people getting better at those standards and having experiences with it. So I think there are a lot of clear resources now to draw on, a lot of clear practices, and what you have to do around them is to create the ownership and the commitment for people to want to get better because they feel that the process that's being enabled is one that they really can get better. And if you just think of motivation, I would say there's the intrinsic motivation of wanting to make an impact, But the other motivation that almost all of us have is if you're working for an organization that helps you get better at what you're doing, that creates commitment and development, and that's what I think the system should do.
Yes, I like that. Good. We have system leaders from around the world who have contributed to video questions to International School Leadership for this webinar with Michael Fullan. So the first one that we have is from Barry Duquesne, who's in Brazil. He's at the head of school at the American School of Brasilia in Brazil, and we're going to hear a question from Barry.
Hello, my name is Barry Duquesne. I am working as the head of school at the American School of Brasilia in Brazil. My question is as follows. In terms of a leader's role associated with professional development and the building of capacity, could you please identify the most effective forms of professional development you believe should be implemented in a school? Thank you.
Thanks, Barry. That's a great question, and it's a key question. And I want to sort of sneak up on it. Sometimes we use the following framework. We say, which of the following three strategies will likely have the biggest impact on teacher improvement? Teacher appraisal, professional development, collaborative cultures. So just think of those three, and this is the direct answer to your question. Teacher appraisal, it might be there, it might not, but you just know by definition it's not going to be intense enough. Even if you have a good framework, most people actually don't. They have the punitive framework, which makes even matters worse. But teacher appraisal will never be intense enough to carry the day. Professional development, which you're asking about, is, interestingly enough, it's not necessarily by itself the way we think of professional development. Take workshops, take an ongoing course, even do it with teams. It's necessary, but it again doesn't really be the deep, powerful one. The one that's powerful is to have a collaborative culture. So this is why we always say to principals, develop the collaborative culture, because when you develop the collaborative culture, if people are collaborating on purpose, focused, they're learning from each other. And it's powerful. It's day after day. It's not episodic. You're in a collaborative culture the moment you walk in the door. So I want to have professional development, but I want principals to say, well, it's the culture of interaction as we improve. That's the really deepest learning crucible we can organize, and then we can reinforce it by selective professional development, even teacher appraisal sometimes. But the professional, let's change professional development to professional learning, and let's think of being in a learning culture as the most powerful way of doing that.
Thanks, Barry, and thanks, Michael. Our second question is actually coming from the same school in Brazil. We have Joe Atherton, Principal Joe Atherton, and Sue Easton, who is Deputy of School for Learning, has another question for Michael.
Hi, Michael. My name is Joe Atherton. I am the lower school principal at the American School of Brasilia in Brazil. And with me is my colleague, Sue Easton. She's the Deputy Head of School for Learning at the American School of Brasilia.
We have a question for you. Our question is, how does the principal create a structure for distributed leadership in a school that helps them move from being the direct instructional leader to being the overall or the organizational leader in the school? Thanks.
Okay, another great question about the structure that would facilitate distributive leadership and other developments. And I want to go back to the basic point of departure that I mentioned, which is the main point is not developing a structure, but developing a culture. We'll come to the structure because that's necessary as well. So the focus then is, how do I develop a culture where people are interacting in a focused way in subgroups and combination groups to move the school forward? And that's the essence of it. If you try to do it by structure first, you say, oh, we'll get a committee for this and a committee for that. The structure changes, but the culture doesn't change. So that's why we want to make the culture the foundation. And I actually don't like the word distributive leadership. I don't know why. It sounds too structural or too you hand it over, because this is a collective focus, it's an interactive focus, and it's the group. But directly on your question, and you can, on my website, which is michaelfullan.ca, on our YouTube channel, we have snippets of schools, 10-minute clips. And there's one in a district we work in the U.S. near Los Angeles called Garden Grove. And there's one from K3 Peters, which means it's a kindergarten to grade 3. And you'll see in that 10-minute clip that the principal, Michelle Pichon, has created a series of committees. One looks at sort of the management issues in the school. Another concentrates on data. A third one talks about the learning that has to occur among principals and about teachers. And so she has about 4 of these. They're mutually exclusive, but they each have 6 or 7 members, so a lot of teachers are on them. But they have a division of labor, but they're connected. And if you just listen and actually see what she's done, she's created a series of structures that extends the participation, and then people start to connect the dots, and the whole school moves forward. We always look, incidentally, in these, is can we not only describe what it should look like, but what's the impact on learning, the measurable impact on learning. We won't look at anything that's not causally concerned about impact. And in this case, they were flatlined on literacy, reading. It went up 11% in 1 year after 2 years of setting the foundation for this. So culture plus structure, and the structure obviously depends on the size of the school. If you've got 300 compared to 1,200, big differences, number of middle management. But it's making sure that there's the culture, making sure the culture focuses on the student achievement agenda, builds the capacity in relation to that, is able to link it to progress, that is measurable progress, and then build structures around that attends to that kind of work.
Great. Thanks, Sue and Joe and Michael. Michael, in your book, one of your more recent books, The Principal, 3 Keys to Maximizing Impact, you talk about the phrase, life changing decidedly for the better, for system leadership.
Yeah.
Can you talk more about that and what this new role could look like?
Right. We started, naturally enough, within the school. So a lot of the research and development in the last 20 years has been school development, school improvement, and changing the role of the teacher and the principal, again, the collaborative culture. And that was the kind of focus over all those years. But those of us that have been working on system improvement, how does the whole system, whether it's Ontario with 5,000 schools or another system with a smaller number, a bigger number, England with 20,000 or 25,000, how does the whole system change? And you realize there, you can't do it one school at a time. The system has to attend it. You can't do it from the center that is imposing it. So what we have in the book, the first key is called lead learner, which is internal to the school mainly. The second key is called system player. And I think it's a sticky concept because system player means whatever your role is, you are contributing to the betterment of the slightly bigger or bigger system, and you're learning from it, you're benefiting it. So contribute and benefit. And this is done through, for example, networks of schools working together. And this is also very important to capture this. We call it leadership from the middle, which means if I'm thinking now of the school principal, the principal is contributing to a network. It's not so much they're helping the bigger system hierarchy, they're actually helping laterally, and they're learning laterally. And when you learn laterally, that's where you get the coherence and the commitment and the ownership. And so this notion of leadership from the middle means the system obviously can help that by supporting networks. The networks have to be purposeful, not just exchanging information, but doing something. And I think we will see, we have seen, whether it's a district arrangement, as we have in North America, or individual schools, as we have in New Zealand with 2,500 schools, the networking step is a step towards greater leadership from the middle. Leadership from the middle means more effect laterally across learning and learning from each other. And I really do say principals have to position themselves as system players. It doesn't mean they spend all their time in the bigger system, right, but they have to be plugged in, two-way street to the bigger system.
And sort of along the same messaging, I think the fact that more principals see themselves as being sharing with or responsible for or as part of a system that they're contributing to the success of, then it makes them feel like they're making a larger contribution.
Yeah, actually the analogy is perfect. If you think inside the school, just think of the teacher. In an individualistic school, the teachers, they give my classroom. In the collaborative school, they're thinking not just of my classroom, but all the kids in the school.
Yes.
That's systemness.
Yes.
And that's inside the school.
Yes.
The analogy, as I said, is exact. Principal now, thinking of just not my school, but the network of schools. I'm as concerned that we connect and we develop together, because I'll be better off. We know we'll be better off if we go forward that way. There's also an interesting element of what we call friendly competition, but
yes.
that comes with the territory.
That's right. Certainly around when I'm speaking in other countries, when they ask me, what is the one thing that you think has contributed most significantly to Ontario's success? I often say that I think it's the deprivatization of education. We have teachers working together, network. We have principals working together. And now here, I think we even see school districts working together.
Exactly.
So that's your point exactly. So we have another international question. Our third question comes from New Zealand, and it is around this question of how to maximize impact. The question is from Marianne Baxter, and Marianne is a recent principal, but she's working at Waikato University in New Zealand at the Institute of Professional Learning, and her role there is working with professional learning groups. So let's hear from Marianne.
Kia ora, Michael. My name is Marianne Baxter, and I'm a Senior Leadership Facilitator at the Institute of Professional Learning, which is part of the Faculty of Education at the University of Waikato, Aotearoa, New Zealand. Our question is, as teacher educators, what do you see are likely to be opportunities where we could be at our most effective supporting leaders in schools to be courageous around change?
I think with your role, and it's an interesting question because you're not actually working directly with principals, as I understood the question. You're working with teachers and wanting to link that. But this is also another element of it. Is in your institute at Waikato, one of your agenda items, and I'm sure you have it, is you are developing collaborative cultures among teachers. That is, if you're doing teacher development or professional learning with teachers, you put into the curriculum, and put it oddly, the notion that you're helping teachers become better collaborators with each other. That's a goal. It's not just better teaching, but better collaborators with others. And then I think if you can do it in the design, you want to contribute to teachers and principals working together. So some of whatever your design can be, and I'm sure there'll be takers to it, you want to say, we're not just going to work with teachers, we'd like to work with teachers and principals in the same group. And whether it's whatever the design is, it might be a few schools or it might be a few individuals that have these different roles. But I would say, basically, you have to have in the same room teachers and school leaders in whatever you do. And therefore, to design any programs that do that will do both of those. And it fits New Zealand very well because the principal development, because of their decentralization, the 2,500 schools, the principal development is actually key to any solution. And there isn't, I would say historically, a system of developing principals, So that's crucial when you have school autonomy, to have principal development and support, and not to do it just by the school leaders, but to do it with teachers, because they can then consolidate with each other.
Absolutely. Thank you. Another question from our group. In what way is the learning leader, and you use that lead learner concept a lot, both a talent scout and a social engineer? That's a difficult question, but I think it's important because we talk about the systemness of education now.
Yeah. Okay, so talent scout, social engineer. The first thing to say is go back to the lead learner concept.
Yes. And
we derived it, among other things, from Ken Leithwood's work, Viviane Robinson in New Zealand, when she did the meta-study of what do principals do that are effective, and calculated the effect size in terms of their impact on school-wide student achievement. She found 5 things that were key to success. Some of them were what we would predict, like helping with the vision and the direction of the school. Another was acquiring resources, including time for teachers to work together. So there are factors like that. But there was one factor that was twice as powerful as the other 4. in effect size, and it was this, and this is the key phraseology: the degree to which the principal participates as a learner with teachers in moving the school forward. So the degree to which the principal participates as a learner. This means that this is good because it has about 3 or 4 payoffs immediately. One, if I'm a principal participating as a learner, I'm learning. And if I do that for 5 years, I get a lot better at it. If I just do the distant things, I get the teachers together, but I don't participate. I get the direction and that. Then I do that for 5 years, I won't know much. 5 times nothing is nothing. So participating as a learner means you learn a lot about this. Secondly, you learn about how to enable the group to learn. So you're using the group to change the group. You get better at that. And then you have a much bigger impact. On the 2 concepts of talent scout and social engineer, talent scout is you are always helping develop other leaders. That's part of this leadership team. But leading the group means you're leading leaders as well as the group itself. So if you're the talent scout means that you are conscious that I am developing leaders in this school as part of the team or as part of my work, and I'm spotting people that should be encouraged or supported. I'm developing, mentoring those that are on my team, and so forth. And that I'm going to. And in fact, the indicator of this in principals in these schools will say this. We've developed a collaborative culture in the last 4 years to the point that I'm no longer essential to be here. Somebody has to be here to be good, but I'm personally now expendable. That's a hard thing for a principal to say, but that's actually what they do say. And they know that when they leave, that the culture is strong, and unless there's a bad leader following them, the new leader will also take it forward. So that's the talent scout, is to make sure you're always cultivating future leadership through the natural work of the collaborative culture. And then the social engineering part is to use the group to change the group. So, I mean, we don't usually use the word engineer all that often, but it really means creating the group learning atmosphere. And again, we see it in the best schools that teachers are learning from each other, they're learning from the principal. There's just a natural kind of a social capital is really what we call it. And we've also said about social capital, make sure it has decisional expertise in it. Right. I know you'll be talking with Lynn Sherritt, our work on putting the faces on data. It's very much about making sure that the decisional capacity of the school is pinpointed around increasingly expert judgment about how to improve the learning of each and every student. And so that decisional capital along with the social capital is crucial.
I'm just going to pick up on your phrase, lead learner. And here in Ontario, we have a huge initiative or a focus on parent engagement. How do you find the balance between expressing our role as school leaders, as lead learner, which could have a connotation that you're still learning, you're not the expert in the field, that kind of thing, with the role of parents and helping them understand that we're always learning. Where does that balance come?
Well, when you take the principal as lead learner concept and think about its development, and I want to talk about parent and community engagement, is that and I wouldn't say that everybody should believe what I believe in this, but this is how I think it should go, it does go best, is that when you don't develop the collaborative culture of teachers, they tend to be unconfident about parents. Yes. And they play it safe, and they don't, they hold back because they're not confident. Yeah. When you develop the collective capacity, it doesn't mean not only are they more effective, but they have a shared sense of purpose. So when one teacher explains something, another teacher, it's consistent across the school when you have a collaborative culture. So my first answer, most fundamental answer, is build the collaborative culture, and that means, and do this, teachers will more confidently, with leadership of the principal, reach out to parent engagement and start to see parents as part of the solution, not the problem. Right. And so they actually go that way with the profession. So I think that's crucial to do that. And then I think on I don't know whether you were saying it this way, but you said, well, what if if the principal, for example, doesn't know everything and parents start to lose confidence that they're not skilled? Well, the fact is they didn't know everything in the first place. We call it the imposter syndrome. Yes. You pretend you know it, but you don't. So I think most people, parents, are in any group, they're quite happy to have a leader who is learning fast and doesn't know everything. In fact, the ones that know everything are more of a problem because they miss things and they're overconfident. So I think, and the other thing is that this happens quickly. That is, if I'm a lead learner and I'm in a learning mode for myself, within 2 or 3 years, I've learned a lot. If I hold back, I don't learn much. So it's not like you sit around as not knowing anything. You actually are on the pathway of knowing more and more rapidly. And I think that's when that confidence gets developed, because it's based on the reality of effective leadership and impact on student learning, then people are more supportive. Then you reach out with the community. And in fact, one of our change agent skills is building partnerships with community.
Yes.
And so that's part of the model.
Right. And I absolutely agree with you that parents are more engaged, or they're less intimidated by the school and leadership in the school if the principal is conferring with them about what the next steps need to be, as opposed to telling them. So very wise, very wise. In your book, you caution about not having layered individualism, you call it. Can you tell us more about what you mean by that?
I was prompted to write the book because of the evolution of the role of the principal as instructional leader in the last 5 years, that evolution. And what I began to see, especially in the U.S., but not only there, was that people have started to take it seriously, and they said, okay, the principal should be the instructional leader. And then they developed a checklist for principals and teacher appraisal instruments and other tools, or walkthroughs, some of which can be fine, but if you just think of the mentality here, the theory of action is now the principal has got more of a role to play explicitly and is going to influence teachers one by one. There are not enough hours in the day to cover, even in school, 10 teachers, let alone 100. And that's also not motivating because it's too mechanical. And so that's what I call the individualistic solution. Individual principals are trying to change individual teachers. And then the layered part is, and this is kind of going from bad to worse, is that many of these systems, the school districts, have appointed and developed and created new roles called instructional supervisors. These are people, a cadre of people at the district level who have 20 schools or 10 or whatever number of schools, and their job is to supervise the supervisors, the principals being the supervisors of teachers. So you can see this, pretty soon it looks ridiculous, because you've got everybody being supervised, and all you've got is a stilted individualistic culture that is not motivating, is alienating. And in the book at the beginning when I critique this, I say, well, what happens actually is the best principals go through the motions of compliance on this one, because it's absolutely alienating to take it seriously. And either they go through compliance and don't do anything else, which I don't recommend, or they make it easy to do the compliant part so they can free themselves up to do the part that's collaborative culture. Right. So they get away with it because collaborative culture is also politically powerful because it works. So I think it's just one of those things that it sounded like a good idea at the first, and then people put it into practice too literally, and all you've done is create a more complicated system that can't work.
Absolutely. And I remember when the leadership framework first came out and people wanted to use it as that checklist, there was a lot of resistance. So totally agree. How can system leaders create conditions under which feedback is not only constructive, but listened to and acted out?
Feedback is one of those human phenomenon that's really mysterious, and we've been working on it. I've been working on it the last 12 months. I'm doing a new book that incorporates feedback as a big feature of it. And it's one of those things where if you don't get feedback, you don't grow.
Yes.
But nobody wants feedback that's critical, so you don't grow. And so you're stuck with it. Really, you're not going to grow if you don't get feedback, even honest feedback that's somewhat critical. You're not going to grow. And this means that the answer actually is trust. And the basis of trust is having a developmental mindset, not a judgmental mindset.
Interesting.
So that this is really what we've tried to do in Ontario. We call it non-judgmentalism, but it's really creating a climate where it's okay to make mistakes, where you're not going to be evaluated literally day after day. So what you have to do is create a feedback system, some of which would be formal, like appraisal systems, much of which would be built into the culture because people are working together. They get feedback all the time. What's it working and all that. And principals need to attend to that. And so when you do that, the culture is one of, this is a culture of growth. It's a growth mindset versus the fixed mindset. And so the key difference in this, first I'm going to say you need feedback. And the key difference, whether it goes right or wrong, is the philosophy that underpins it. If the philosophy is developmentalism, it will work. If the philosophy is we've got to kind of judge people and correct them, it just won't work. People back off it. So, and the other part that we have in this is transparency. If you have trust and transparency, they can work together. If you have mistrust and transparency, fireworks. So transparency of data, transparency of practice is a natural feedback mechanism. So transparency, for example, of data, the results come out, you're in one school, I'm in a school in the same district, your literacy scores went up seriously and mine are flatlined, and everybody knows it, it's going to tweak something. And so you're bound to notice it. Same with practice. When we did schools on the move, things like that, and other strategies similar, you identify schools that are getting somewhere, and you try to get the demographics such so you can see schools just like yours, but they're getting somewhere, the apples to apples thing. And that you wrap around it. Judgmentalism would be this. You're in your school, and here's a school over here that's doing better. Why can't you be more like your brother? That would be judgmentalism. Non-judgmentalism is, here's a school just like yours. They're getting somewhere. Go and take a look and see if you can learn anything. That's a way different approach to it. And the second one works way better than the first one, obviously. I mean, when you say it that way. And so that's how we've stimulated learning. We have made it easy for schools to learn about other schools that are, sometimes they're in a network, or sometimes it's just the schools on the move where you find each other in the bigger system, or the Leading School Achievement project that you've sponsored or as part of the group. They're constantly looking at each other's work. And we have many mechanisms of doing that. And when you stop and think about it, feedback is built into those interactions. Feedback of transparency of practice and transparency results.
And you're so right in the fact that it's that climate of trust, it's that climate of being able to take risks and being seeking out honest feedback. You grow with that feedback. So,
good. It's the hardest human thing to do, I think, is to come to the conclusion that you as an individual need feedback all through your life. It's a hard thing to come to grips with, but that's growth.
It is,
absolutely. You won't learn it by yourself if you're not getting feedback.
Good. Okay. Thank you very much, Michael. We certainly are coming to the kind of the close of our interview, but in thinking about our audience there from all over the globe and what they might like to learn from having, I know some of them got up in the middle of the night to take part in this webinar, so congratulations to those people. So what are the three main ideas, the concepts, or perhaps we could call them lessons, that you think our audience of school leaders should take away from this experience with you today?
We have covered them, obviously, because we did pretty comprehensively across that. Obviously, one for me is the lead learner concept. Really understand that your job is not to be a leader, but a leader of leaders, and that means proactive, getting involved and doing it. So that's one key thing. The second thing is to make sure the agenda is student achievement agenda. Seems unnecessary to say that, but you actually really have to take seriously that as a priority, and that has to be not only the student achievement agenda and improvement, but linkage causally, I want to say it just to force it, to is it working? Is there progress? Are students learning? What are the results? So you push yourself to make that. And the third one is to have a whole system perspective on it. Whether you're one individual or you're a system leader, you're thinking about how do we do things in this whole system, regardless of the size of it, but it is the whole system. You don't do it all at once, but you say from day one, this is the whole system improving, and we're going to have to invest in that. And we've seen that you start to get progress within a couple of years. And once it takes hold, it's got a life of its own because so many people are maintaining it. And not only maintaining it, but they're socializing the newcomers. So it's almost a built-in thing of sustainability that is easier then to continue than it was to start. So getting started and getting the critical mass is the first part to accomplish, and then you have to fuel it continually for the future.
Good. And I certainly like that concept of everybody has to see themselves and their role in the success of the system. So thank you, Michael.
Good, great questions. I always learn a lot by the questions too.
Very
so thank
good.
you very much. And to those that also recorded them and sent them in.
Oh, yes, absolutely. We certainly here at OPC and International School Leadership continue to appreciate your commitment to not only creative thinking, but the focus on improved student learning that you've helped us gel or make sure that we keep that focus. But the thing that I always appreciate working with you is that we're not just talking about Ontario. We're talking about across the globe. And certainly on our International School Leadership Advisory Board, we've really appreciated your input and helping it make a global perspective on that program. So, and just for our audience there, anyone who's interested in learning more about Michael's book, The Principle, 3 Keys to Maximizing Impact, you can find that information on our website. And also to let you know that we invite you to continue the conversation with International School Leadership and our Elite Advisory Committee through our website. We have a Twitter account, Facebook, and LinkedIn. So let's continue the conversation and keep it as a global conversation. Thanks, everyone.